Now, today, we're gonna look at very instructive game from my student who is around 1600 plus against an 1800 player. And I feel like the mistakes at this level are very, very instructive for a lot of club players out there. And the game begins as the kind of the classic perk modern defense, e4, d6. d6 is the perk move order, the modern is g6, but the concept is the same. Black is gonna play either knight f6, or in this case, black plays g6, and try to surrender the center to put pressure on this center later on. So knight f3, bishop g7, bishop c4, so far so good. And here, black plays natural move, knight f6. Now, white is already out of book around here, and this clearly tells me that my student played bishop c4 based on general chess knowledge. This system is playable by white, but you have to follow it up with a very accurate move here. Instead, white plays a very generic move, knight c3, which I expect a lot of low-rated players to play. The funny part is in e4, e5 openings, the bishop is actually well placed on c4. You control this beautiful diagonal. Obviously, you put pressure on the f7 pawn, but this is not a good square for the bishop if you follow it up with knight c3. And funny enough, black does not recognize this and kind of plays generic development moves, not really interested in punishing this bishop to c4 move quite yet. Although, if you pause the video, you may already start to realize black has a very interesting idea. This is a well-known simplification idea that is very common in this opening. And of course, the idea is knight takes e4. Well, the point being is after knight takes e4, d5, you can see that black is going to get their pawn back by forking the bishop and the knight. For instance, bishop d3, d takes e, bishop takes e4, and the position is roughly equal. Black doesn't have any serious problems. This bishop is quite open, and white also is not really risking to lose the game anytime soon, but this is the kind of simplification that a player with less space, which here we see black, is looking for. So now, maybe white had an idea to answer knight takes e4 with a tactic. Perhaps you even consider this during your thought process. Bishop takes f7, intermezzo check. And this is not as trivial to evaluate. On one hand, we have a king that lost the right to castle. On the other hand, we have two powerful bishops, and black has two central pawns against one. How would one evaluate this position? Not easy at all. But if you realize that it's black's turn, and black is about to do what we call castle by hand or manual castle, you realize that black probably will not experience any issues here. For example, castles for white, and black plays king to g8. Now, black's king is relatively safe. The bishop may go to f5 or g4 with a normal development game. So this is also totally fine for black. So going back to the game, this is the reason why knight c3, very natural move, is not the best. The correct is queen e2. And only queen e2 is the way to protect the pawn. Because now knight takes e4 doesn't work. The queen and the bishop cover the square. Black is simply a piece down. Again, very unusual setup, but you have to know when you play something like that. Later, the bishop drops back to b3, for example, c6, bishop b3. To avoid this idea, pawn usually goes to c3. This guy can go to h3. Knight may go to d2. White maintains the center, and this is a totally playable setup by white. But clearly, my student wasn't aware of this. Going back to the game, he plays knight c3. Black castles castles. And again, knight takes e4 is always an option to simplify. Black plays a decent move c6. Yet another reason why bishop on c4 is a little misplaced, because b5 and d5 are natural ideas in this opening. Well, guess what? White plays a4, which is a logical way to stop b5 expansion, and yet again, we have a dogmatic plan chosen by the black player. Again, I want to really emphasize the fact that when you learn an opening, don't just dogmatically follow plan no matter what your opponent does. That's not the point. The point is you have to be aware of various ideas and concepts that do come up based on what your opponent does. Here, black already messed up. He plays a very natural knight d7 move. But as it turns out, it's a terrible, terrible move because clearly they're following the dogmatic principle to put the knight on d7, queen on c7, and eventually try to strike in the center. So let me go back a move and ask you guys this question. What should black do instead? So instead of knight d7, why just play a4 to stop b5? What would you do instead? Please pause the video if you need more time. And the non-dogmatic answer here is, well, why do we need to play for e5 if we can strike the center immediately with d5 exclam? You may say, but I just played d6. Well, you are gaining a huge tempo on the bishop. That's the only reason why d5 works. And after pawn takes, bishop d3, for those who are familiar with the Caro-Kann defense exchange variation, after knight c6, we actually transpose to that opening where instead of the pawn being on c3, which is a very nice, beautiful pawn chain, there's a knight on c3, which is misplaced. You don't have time to regroup to play c3 because black is going to go after that bishop and black will get the bishop pair. Very subtle, but that involves wide spectrum of opening ideas, right? Again, white and black player perhaps wasn't aware of this. That's why important, guys, for you to learn many different openings and many different concepts rather than one opening and memorize 20, 30 lines deep. You're not going to get to that position if you memorize that deep. So missed opportunity yet again. Now white has a stable advantage. Specifically, the bishop is perfectly placed against this e5 pawn push. So white grabs space, excellent move. Queen c7. I love white's next prophylactic move. h3, taking the square under control to prepare bishop e3. And once black plays for e5, now takes bishop e3. We've stabilized the position, and this is a dream position for white. Now, I hope everybody understands that a lot of openings result in this somewhat symmetrical structure, yet this is the ideal version for white. And it's all about black's bishops versus white's bishops. If you look at these two bishops, they have absolutely nowhere to go. This guy is stuck behind his own pawn. This guy is stuck behind the knight, and even if the knight gets to go, none of these squares are available. The bishop on c8 is forever stuck. Whereas look at the monsters, the e3 bishop, and of course, the c4 bishop controls so much space. White is clearly better, long-term advantage. Now, b5 is played. Black is seeking counterplay and trying to change the nature of the game, trying to play aggressively. But that is the reason that white has the pawn on a5. They can actually insert en passant. I love this move, breaking up black's pawn structure. Knight takes, because you couldn't take with the pawn. Very important that the rook is unprotected. You lose the material here. So knight took on b6. Bishop's under attack. It's very important to keep the diagonal in control. So bishop b3 is autopilot move. And now black plays a5. Does black have any serious threats? Not really, because a4 in itself is not a threat. You can always take and win the pawn with rook takes a4, for example, or knight takes a4, tempo on the queen. So this is not a threat. Yet, White panics and plays a terrible move from a positional perspective. Bishop takes b6. Now, very important that my student learned his lesson. Even though this game was played a few years ago, when he went over this game again with me, he immediately pointed out, well, why did I play this move? I just gave up the bishop pair for no reason. And these are the kind of things club players have to be aware of. In chess, certain principles should not be violated unless you have a concrete reason to. Since a4 is not a threat, black has no threats, white can pretty much continue with either prophylactic plan, rook e1, and rook d8, you can move the queen to c1. This is one possibility. Or you can move the queen out of the danger zone, queen c1 right away, and leave the d1 square for the rook. Again, notice that white is not in a hurry to double down on his advantage. He's happy with the bishops. There's no need to rush things. Okay, very important to keep that in mind. It's a small but long-lasting advantage. Now the game enters a totally different phase. Bishop takes b6. Believe it or not, white is actually still maintaining an advantage, but you have to have engine-like precision, which is very difficult in chess. For example, knight takes e5, trying to grab material. But, of course, you have to calculate this all out. What if there's knight takes e4? This is not easy for club players to calculate unless you have absolutely stockfish-like perfect calculation skills. And again, you may notice that there's an intermezzo lurking here with knight takes f7. Very difficult move. And white could get away with knight takes e5. So obviously this was too difficult for my student, and I did not expect him to calculate this perfectly. He plays knight a4, typical club level move, queen c7, and rook e1. Now, white still maintains pressure. These pawns are broken up. The two bishops are not as powerful, yet I already sense danger lurking. Rook d8 may come in, bishop h6 may come in, bishop a6 may come in. These are the kind of things that start to cause trouble. Black, though, plays a little bit quiet with knight h5, although it does have a logical idea to activate the knight. And here, once again, white plays a poor decision with knight d2. White is sort of treating this game as a static game, trying to regroup the knight to c4, maybe move the queen to f3. But the problem is the game is quickly becoming dynamic after black's logical move rook d8. It's already not obvious how to break the pin. Queen c1, bishop h6. Oopsies. Okay, you may wonder, what about queen e2? Knight f4. Or even bishop a6 is on the agenda. You see, these are the kind of moves you don't want to deal with. So rook d8 I felt was really annoying. Yet, black plays knight f4. Again, dogmatic thought process. I just played knight h5 to play knight f4. I kind of ignored what I did with his last move. I'm going to execute my plan. So you see, these kind of common dogmatic thought process mistakes are very common at these levels. Queen f3, I think this is a good logical move. White is again trying to gain the advantage. We have a, pretty nice control with this knight coming in here. Black seeks counterplay. Queen e7. The possibilities may be the queen swing. King h2, again, prophylactic move. King h8, both players are getting ready for action the king side. Knight b6, not bad. Going after this bishop. Rook b8, knight takes, rook takes. I like the fact that white removed one of the potential attackers. And here is the question for everyone. Should you take the pawn on a5? Should you take the pawn on a5? Interesting enough, my student took the pawn, but for the wrong reason. And we'll see what happened later. So again, pause the video if you need more time. There's a little bit of a problem with rook takes a5. You have to notice that the rook and the knight are loose pieces. With loose pieces, you have to be really aware of tactics, such as double attack. We have two types of double attacks in this position. One is queen b4, the other one is queen d8. Luckily enough, both of these moves are met with the brilliant defensive idea, queen c3. Without this defensive move, white's in trouble. Now, if you saw this, you can pat yourself on the back and say, oh, of course I can take that pawn. I'm doing great. But there's a hidden tactic that black player missed here. Black can actually play knight takes g2, exclam. And the point is, after you take with the queen, that queen is removed from this option. And now I can play, potentially, the queen d8 and queen d4. Now, black has to be careful which of the two squares to choose from. Queen d8 is a big mistake because knight gets out and you protect the rook. The correct move is queen b4. There's a third tactic, which is the x straight on this rook. And this is how black gets the material back. So this is completely, totally fine for black. White missed this, and so did black. So tactics do matter at any level, especially at the lower levels. So this is missed, but black plays a logical move f5. Okay, white takes, with the idea that if takes, queen takes f4, neat idea. Okay, but black simply takes with the rook. Although white is doing fine here, psychologically, black is actually enjoying potential attacks. There's knight takes h3 threat. Notice that if queen takes, rook h5 will win the queen. There's also rook g5 ideas. White is panicking and plays queen g3. I don't like this move. Probably more accurate is to keep the queen on this diagonal. But okay, queen g3 is played, queen d8. Look at this brilliant double attack. That was the whole point of black's strategy. Now, black wants to lure the queen away from g3 to protect the rook, or play knight c4. In this case, rook g5 is coming to hit g2. So let's see what happens. So knight c4 is played, rook g5 is played, queen f3 is played, check, king h1, queen h4. Now clearly, white is not very happy. From some stable advantage, you go into some crazy tactical sequence, and you have 1, 2, 3 pieces, enemy pieces, around your king. You're barely defending. Luckily, you have the queen around, but f2 pawn is weak. It's time to panic. And that's what my student did. He panicked, he lost the game in just a few moves. Let me show you how. He plays rook e4, bam, rook takes f2, rook takes f4, hoping for some kind of tactics, but e takes f, nothing works here. Queen g4, already completely lost. Look at this brilliant move, rook e8, and of course, if queen takes queen, checkmate. But, as we typically know, the hardest thing is to defend when you're being attacked. You have to keep focus and kind of peace of mind. Don't panic. That's the first advice. At the moment, queen takes h3 is actually not a threat. Neither is knight takes h3. The rook is loose. Okay, in that case, you have time to execute your own counterplay. You have 2 rooks and the knight attacking the e-pawn. Why don't you pause for a minute, pause your video, and see if you can calculate out a way for white to get out of this attack. And of course, the move is knight takes e5. You actually create threats. If rook takes f2, your threats are much more valuable. Look at this. Bam! If you saw this, good job. You're a very strong calculator. But we're not done. Now there's a discovery. Bam! Take the rook out of the game. King, let's say, goes here. Look at this. Check. And queen c3. Forced mate. Fun line. White could have won this game if black falls for this trap. Although black is unlikely to fall for it, but still, it's a cool idea. And probably black should take on e5, and the game peters out to some kind of equality. We can always play queen g4. You're not gonna get mated. In the end game, white is doing fine. Nothing to worry about. So you see, the lessons in this game are on different levels. First of all, the dogmatic play by black in the opening really got them into trouble. white got this brilliant middle game with the two bishops on c4 and e3. But then white took on b6 for no apparent reason. He didn't really follow it up with knight takes e5 and quickly got into a little bit of trouble where black had a little bit of initiative. White was still completely fine, but psychologically, it was much tougher to play. Black unleashed this attack, and white just fell apart. Instead, cold-blooded calculation showed us that, nope, knight takes e5, everything is under control. Eventually, you can equalize easily. So these are very common mistakes at every level, but especially at the club level. I hope you get to learn from them and improve your own chess. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching the video. Please support this channel by liking and subscribing. Until next time.